And in all my work across different places in the world, there's not very many places where there's enough in wild country to have the full complement of bears and wolves and all those carnivores. They take a lot of space. They have to have a lot of space. You know, they have big home ranges. They have to cover a lot of ground to make a living. So you need to have a big area of wild, fairly wild country to even think about having them. So there's not very many places in the world where we have that big space. And we do here in the Cascades, the North Cascades, because of the, I'll show you a map here in a minute, but because of all the public ownership, national parks and national forests alone, it's like 6.5 million acres of wildlife north of our Canadian border. There's another about 3 million acres of fairly wild land on the Canadian side, and they're interested in conservation of carnivores. So it's a rare opportunity that we get to have what I call a living laboratory, where we can see a system functioning kind of how it did naturally with that full complement of carnivores. It's very rare. And you know, like when I was traveling to Pakistan, a lot of those carnivores are just barely hanging on. They're not doing well. In Italy, that grizzly bear was gone, and they're trying to recover it and bring it back in some places. So there's good examples of where the carnivores aren't there anymore. In most cases, there's just rare places where we have that culture. We certainly do say there are examples in Alaska, but in the lower 48, we have very competitive. I just want to talk a second about here. So there's a reason why bears are attracted to food. So if you take a look at a skull of a bear, black-footed or grizzly, you'll see that the front of the skull has the typical carnivore, the big canines. You know, they look pretty mean. If you look at the back teeth, they're more like flat molars. So their canine or their back teeth are a lot more like ours. So they're equipped to, yes, they are carnivores, but they're equipped to grind plant food. So those back molars are grinders. Food that is cooked or prepared is sort of pre-digested for them. So you get more nutrients out of it. So if they find human foods, they're getting stuff out of there. They're getting good stuff out of it. So they're attractive. They can come habitually into the food pretty quickly. That's why it's a challenge. One of our probably our lessons, if we're going to manage for bears, whether it's black or grizzly bear, is keeping that human food away or out of out of their reach. It's really key. So they get a lot we learn from other areas where there are grizzly bears. These are the same things you want to do if you have black bears. When I'm camping in the backcountry, I hang my food pretty cautious with how I manage my food. I have this is what's called an sack. It's a pretty heavy duty cloth that is not, a bear can't, it's contested, bears can't rip it open. But what I don't like about it is bears can do this to the food that's in there. I definitely see a bear doing that to that, but I use it because it's fairly light and it provides some protection to my food and it's easy to hang. So, other places I've used the good old container. I'm not a huge fan of these. I use these in serious grizzly bear country. It's just a little bulky in your pack, but there are places where it's necessary. The thing that these are guidelines. When I'm in the backcountry, it's not always possible for me to cook 100 yards. Very rare to have a campsite. So you have to do your best. It's pretty judicious. Okay, I'm going to talk through a little bit of research here. So this is kind of how we traditionally did wildlife science. We had to capture a bear, we drugged it, we put a radio collar on it, we put a number of ear tag on it. It was very invasive. It was invasive to the animal, it was expensive. Sometimes, things happen that you don't want to have happen. So we have better techniques in the last decade or so, remote cameras and other techniques that we could do. So we have a bigger suite of tools, if you will, to study bears and other wildlife. So remote camera, this is what we call a hair snare, where we build a pile, we put a pile of sticks, and we put a barbed wire strand around about 30 feet across. So it's about a 100-foot piece of barbed wire in a circle, and pile of sticks in the middle. Oh, I gotta watch myself. and in the middle of that, we put this nasty, stinky, smelly, gooey stuff. We call it our goo. And a goo is something that we make. We collect roadkill deer, spawned out salmon carcasses. We put them in giant barrels, and we stir them over the winter. And they turn from solid to liquid. By the time spring rolls around, you get that lovely looking reddish color. And if I were to pop it, we'd clear this place out in a second. It's really, really nasty. Asia here has just poured goo over the pile. He's not very happy because it was a really warm day, and the top of that bottle was kind of like had that, you know, yeah. And it just went over the top. And now, you know, in this case, we're in the middle of the state wilderness. We got to pack that bottle around for the rest of the trip. This is what we call the downwinder. Grizzly wasn't paying attention to the wind. She didn't make two mistakes. She didn't pay attention to the wind. When John popped the cap, she turned the camera on and stood right in front of us, so we got a great picture. This is Reuben running away. Unfortunately, he has a stinky bottle with him, so it's just carrying the smell of it. Anyway, we had great stories with him. I have to tell you, by the time we got done doing our research, I could pour goo and sit down and eat a sandwich. But at first, it was pretty much. So what we're trying to do with that corral, we're trying to attract the bear to that site. It goes either under or over that corral, and it gets hair snuck on that barbed wire. And from that hair, we can send in an analysis of DNA, and we can determine whether we got a grizzly bear or a black bear. It's a really solid way of getting that. Sometimes photographs work, and sometimes they don't, like I showed you. But this is pretty for sure. So over the course of many years, from about 2012 to 2019, I did a lot of research in the Cascades, going all over the place. You can see where we put these things. So this is the I-90 corridor all the way up to Canada. The dark green up there is North Cascades Park and state wilderness, all that stuff. 650 sites over the course of that time. And a lot of those sites we also were able to get cameras on, but not all of them. So our hair snagging was our primary. You can kind of see here what we did. We got 650 sites. We captured hair from 644 black bears, 0 grizzly bears over the course of that. Yeah. So that tells us something about, we can't say there aren't any. We get a few of those sightings every year that we're unsure of, but we can say there aren't very many. And that's kind of what has caused concern about the status of the grizzly bear in the Cascades, is the fact that we just don't have really good evidence that we have very many left. But we got some really cool photos from these cameras that we put out. This is the bear doing the rub. I saw this photo and I'm like, do we have anteaters in the North? This is the craziest looking black bear I have ever. Oh my God. I did a real double take on that little guy. Not a very big bear, but pretty colorful. I love this photo. This mama came in with 2 cubs. Those cubs rolled in that goo. And when they walked off, their fur was just matted with goo. So you know they smell to high heaven for weeks after. Grizzly bear or black bear? It's a black bear right before it grabbed the camera and ripped it off the tree. Any idea what that is? I heard back here. No, you're close. Lynx, yeah. Yeah, and you can see the pretty good sized front feet. Those are like snowshoes that let it kind of surf through the snow. This is up in the state wilderness, really typical lynx habitat. So we got a lot of really interesting information on grizzly bear, canine lynx, wolverine. We got several wolverines on our cameras. We even got a few of these guys. These are the wolf pack. that we discovered up near Ross Lake several years back. So got some photos of wolves as well. Everything except for grizzly bears. I want to just take a little bit of time and share with you how we got to the point where we don't have very many grizzly bears. This is a trapper cabin taken along, this photo was taken in, I believe it was 1902, along the shore Lake Chelan. This is a fur trap cabin. There are some lynx, some bobcats, there's a wolverine, there's a couple black bears. There's a whole bunch of coyotes going out of my line here. Over here is a big, it's hard to see on this photo, but there's a big bear hide. I can't tell you for sure what it is, but it looks kind of suspicious. We know that in the mid 1800s, from about 1820 to 1840, that range in there, 1850, the Hudson Bay forts, there were 4 Hudson Bay forts in and around the North Cascades, a couple in Canada, a couple in the US side. They processed almost 4,000 bear hides, grizzly bear hides, several thousand more black bears, but grizzly bear hides through those forts. That period of 20, 30 years was probably a major impact to the grizzly bear population in the Cascades. They just don't occur at that great a densities to sustain that kind of impact. Those trappers were taking all kinds of furs. It was the same time that things like the beaver they were trapping heavy on the beaver, and the beavers were pretty much trapped out of much of the Cascade. So it was a significant impact to the grizzly bear. Now, not all those 4,000 hides came out of the north, what we call the North Cascades. There were probably areas around outside of there, but undoubtedly many did. It was a major focus of the Hudson Bay Company at that time. We also then, that was kind of followed up in the 1940s, 50s, that era in there, by government trappers. This is a famous fellow named Pete Peterson, the government trapper up north. He was actually a ranger for the Forest Service who liked to track animals. And he chased this grizzly bear, which was killed up near Mazama in I think 1922, 23, something like that. That was, just further evidence that, yeah, there were a handful, but there weren't very many. And Pete spent a good portion of his summer tracking this bear before he got it. This is a newspaper article from the last grizzly bear that was legally shot in the Cascades. This was also up close to the North Cascades Highway, 1967. The bear it was legal to shoot grizzly bears at that time. They weren't listed until 1970. So this was a photo of the guy with his bear mount. He had it mounted. So we have that evidence that shows that we had kind of that major impact on the bear population in the mid 1800s, and then additional impacts from the government trapping that went on into the 1940s, 50s, that era in there. And it just left a situation where we don't have the bears that are left. So what we kind of see here, this is the area that is the focus of the recovery area. So you go I-90 north, and you can see there's the North Cascades Park, the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, and then the Okanagan Wenatchee on the east side. That's the area that's been identified for the recovery zone for grizzly bears. So wolves are making a pretty good comeback in this area. A lot of them on the east side here, they're doing pretty well. This is the Canada lynx. That's another federally listed species. They're not doing so good. And a lot of that has to do with climate change and all the fires that are happening in their habitat. I think something like 60% of their habitat has burned in the last 20 years. Significant amount. So kind of concerned about what they're doing, but there's still lynx up there. Wolverines seem to be making a pretty darn good comeback. We've seen more and more. We get more and more of them on our cameras. So that seemed to be a pretty good success story. But grizzly bears, just because of that history, we have the habitat. It's a great habitat, but we just don't have a lot of evidence there's many bears that are left. And that's what's led to this effort to look at potential ways to restore the grizzly bear population in the Cascades. And that's some of the efforts that are underway. And this is the area that they're looking at doing that. I think. One thing I did want to share with you. So when you're out in the woods and you're packing stinky goo with you, and you're trying to find a bear, it's kind of nice to be able to protect yourself in case you do. So we packed this. This is bear spray. very effective, used a lot in other ecosystems, effective for both grizzly bears and black bears. And I guess this is an effective tool to carry. We carried it with us when we were bouncing around with all that stinky stuff on our backpack. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Did you ever have an opportunity to spray the bear spray in all of those moments of being in bear country with the bears?
I had some interesting interactions with black bears mostly, because that's what's more common. But I always was able to sort of figure a way out. And a lot of it was just being calm in the moment. Hey bear, and a lot of times they're just trying to figure out what you are. Bears don't have very good eyesight. They have amazing smell, and they're oftentimes trying to just sort out what you are. Some of the bear biologists I work with have a theory that when a grizzly charges, it's not really trying to eat you. It's trying to sort out what you are and see how you react. So I know a biologist that tested that theory, which was nothing I would ever want to do. But he was hiking through Yellowstone through this pretty thick lodgepole pine forest, which there's a lot of in Yellowstone. And he happened to have a camera on his chest. And he stepped onto this old roadbed where you could see for a ways down this roadbed. And he turned and looked, and there was a sow and a cub not too far from him. And she caught wind of him and turned and came at him. And he just stood there, but he had the presence of mind to hold down the shutter on his camera. And he got this amazing set of photos. And she came up, and sure enough, she put the brakes on right before she got to him. And I would have done more harm to myself than the bear would have at that point. But and she stopped and she sniffed him and she walked away. He has this amazing series of photos of that for her. But I'm not brave enough. Yeah. So 1996. It's the last time we could say, and it was actually a Canadian bear biologist hiking in Glacier Peak Wilderness that saw a grizzly bear. I know who he is. I'm not happy with him because I've spent hundreds and thousands of hours out there and I have not had that experience. Yeah. We've had a lot of close calls, I will say, some of those sightings that we just can't say for sure. I would say not a lot, a handful of what are kind of unknowns. Yeah, so it's been a while. Yeah.
You mentioned the black bears being at the lower elevation and the higher elevation, typically for the grizzly bears. And since the grizzlies are not there, the black bears moving up. What's wrong with that?
Oh, nothing. No, it's fine. It's just the way those bears sort of, if there were both bears there, it's the way they sort of reduce their competition, so they can both make sure they find enough food. Yeah. It turns out that there's another reason why they do that. So grizzly bears evolved in an open tundra-like environment. So it's really open. There's no trees. And so they're comfortable in that open environment. And they evolved their method to protect their cub, because there's no tree to send them up, is to be aggressive. So they're aggressive towards potential threats to their cubs. Black bears, on the other hand, evolved in a forested environment. That's why they're such good, climbers. And so their method to protect their cub is to go and send that cub up a tree. And it's amazing how quickly that's happened. I had a few situations where I come across a sow and a cub, and she does some signal, and that cub knows it is up that tree. And it's amazing to see them go. They can climb so well. So it's more about what environment are they more comfortable in, more used to at finding foods and protecting their young. I would imagine a black bear that's in a high elevation, a mom and a cub with no trees around, feels a little vulnerable because she doesn't have that safety of sending her cub up the tree. Yeah.
What does it look like?
Yeah, so the things that they're looking at are where do you get the bears from? Where would you put them if you do it? And then how do you monitor to make sure it's working? And so what some of the ideas there's bears that are potentially you could bring farther north. One thing you don't want to do, there's a couple things about the characteristic of the bear you want to bring in. You want to have females and males, you got to have both. You want them to be pretty young so that they have several breeding years ahead. And you don't want them to have any history of human problems. And you don't want them to be feeding on salmon because our bears are probably not going to make a living just on salmon. So those are some of the things. So it's only that narrows down where you can get those bears from. There's a place kind of farther north of the Cascades in British Columbia that would be a good source. And then there's some bears over more in Montana that might be a good source. I think the idea would be a handful of bears, literally 5 or 6 bears. Move them in, radio collar on every bear, put them in the wildest part of the Cascades that we got, and monitor the heck out of them. Fortunately, we have good telemetry that allows us to monitor them really attentively without having to go out. We can get the satellite imagery. All the signals come to our desk from the radio collars. So there's tools that we can use to monitor that. I think you're also going to have a plan if that bear goes someplace where you don't want it to go. You capture it and you put it back where it should be before any problem happens. Those are the kind of things that you would want to think about if you're going to do something. Good question. Yeah.
So is that 5 to 6 kind of your long-term restoration goals, or is that just what you're starting with?
That would be a starting point, and then, well, and this is theoretical. And then if that works, you bring 5 more. I think you're going to have to build that population up really slowly though, to make sure you're not, the bears are doing what you want them to do.
And
Yes.
what would ideal population numbers look like for forward?
So our best guesstimate of how many bears this system could support, given the amount of human activity, and that's something you really got to think about. As you go south in that ecosystem, the human activity picks up significantly. The Alpine Lakes Wilderness have a lot of people. So you don't want as many bears there as you do where there's fewer people. There's parts of the park that are really remote, but a couple hundred bears would probably be a reasonable number, a recovered number, something like that. We did some fancy population estimation trying to come up with a range of values, and that's kind of what we came up with. So it's not a lot of bears. If you look at the 6.5 million acres and 200 bears, the density of bears, that's really, really low. That's way lower than Yellowstone and the other ecosystems. But it's a number where that population would start sort of sustaining itself, and you wouldn't have to think about adding more. We're talking about a long, long ways down the road before you would get to 200. A long way. Nothing we're ever going to see, and probably our kids. The long-term proposition. Yeah.
How did you get here?
I'm sorry.
How did you get it?
How did I get interested here? Oh boy. Shoot. So yeah, I did my master's degree on Harlequin ducks, but did not prepare me that well to finish that. I started working for the Forest Service, and I started working when years and years ago, when the conversation about recovery in the North Cascades first happened, which would be the late 80s, early 90s. Before they declared it a recovery zone, there was what was called an evaluation study. And that actually took 5 years. And that's where we started. Is the habitat there? What's the status of the population? So I got hired to work on that study just as a field technician running around in the woods collecting plant data. It's a pretty cool job, by the way. And about halfway through that study, so this would be like the late 80s, early 90s, that the leader of that study moved. He took his dream job in the Caribbean National Forest in Puerto Rico, and they gave me the job to take over. And so I had to become a bear expert. And then I went on to do my PhD on black bears in the Cascades, did a big telemetry study of black bears in the Cascades. And that's kind of how I got into the bear world. The bear world is interesting. Every carnivore has its own little world. There's a group of biologists that work on them, and they don't let you in just because you show up one day. You have to prove yourself. So I had to go to bear meetings, and I had to, do my research and publish my papers and get into the bear world. It's a kind of a tough. Other questions? Yeah, sorry. So just across the border in what's called the BC Cascades, that's the most endangered population of BC. They're not doing very well. They do though, like that photo that I showed you of the bear posing for the claw with the claw, that was in their recovery zone. So they have better evidence of a few bears probably than we do, more recent evidence anyway. But they're looking at that same place we might get bears up north for our system. They're looking at moving into their park as well. Yeah, it's kind of been one of those discussions. Well, you go first. No, you go first. No, you go first. Because they're all connected, and the bears easily move back and forth across that border. That bear that I showed you, the fancy claws, that was not that far north of the border, easily within a couple of days walking in the Satan Wilderness.
So the one, they don't have access to this.
Right, they're isolated from there's a lot of big valleys with a lot of human development and that isolates the Cascades from other systems. Then there's another population more towards, if you go up to the Cascades and go west towards the coast in British Columbia, there's bear populations there, but they're quite a ways away from our Cascades, and there's a lot of human development along there that keeps them from moving in pretty readily anyway. So there's not really a natural source of bears to move into North Cascades and kind of repopulate on their own. So that if we're going to recover, or, restore that population, it's going to take people moving bears to make that happen. Otherwise, you would just let time do its thing and bears will move in, but it's not possible. Good question, though. Yeah.
I only know only one bear that maybe to grizzly bear. Hunting ranchers. What are some of the uses here?
Yeah, there's an agricultural community that's concerned. A lot of, especially here on the east side. Bears like apples. There's ways to deal with that. Grizzly bears are probably not as prone to that as black bears because they do generally avoid people. They're not as easy to habituate, but there still are issues there. The recreation community is split on it, honestly. I think there's concern, there's a safety concern, but there's also, are we going to end up with closures that would limit access for recreation? I can tell you in the other ecosystems, there's a lot of recreation that happens. There are closures, but usually they're fairly short term. I mean, I was hiking in Glacier Peak or Glacier Park, and I wanted to go to Iceberg Lake. Some of you may know where that is. And then there was a mama and two cubs on that trail. So I had to figure out a different way to go that day. But it was about 2 weeks that she was there, and they didn't want people, interacting with her. So they shut her off. That's typical of the kind of closures that happen. It's just kind of simple. But recreating in grizzly bear country has a different feel. There's some different things you want to do to just be safe. So. Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You could all help by stacking them back in the back corners. And there's another one up here. Very helpful. And everyone online, I am so sorry. We have been working on our hybrid system a little bit lately, and we're not sure what was going on tonight. So we will work on that in the next few days. Take care.